My parents told everyone I was a failure. I sat silently in my brother's engagement dinner. Then, his fiancée looked at me and whispered, "Wait, you're Michael Carter?" The room went still. Not even my father could speak. My parents told everyone I was a failure. I sat silently in my brother's engagement dinner, and then his fiancée looked at me and whispered, "Wait, are you Michael Carter?" The room went still. Not even my father could speak. Thank you for being here with me today. I hope you're having a wonderful day wherever you are. I'd love for you to share in the comments what city or country you are watching this from and what time it is there now. Let's begin our story together. The invitation lay on my worn kitchen counter. Its creamy cardstock and embossed lettering offered a stark contrast to the chipped formica. Hassan Carter and Sarah Miller request the pleasure of your company. It felt less like an invitation and more like a summons, a royal decree I couldn't ignore. The engagement dinner. My younger brother, Jason, the golden child, was getting married, and I, Michael Carter, the 32-year-old family disappointment, was expected to attend and play my part. A familiar constriction tightened in my chest, like old barbed wire twisting anew. 10 years. 10 years since I dropped out of medical school, and the brand of failure still felt seared into my skin. I could still smell the sharp, cloying scent of formaldehyde from the anatomy lab, a smell that had once symbolized intellectual pursuit, but had slowly morphed into the reek of my own suffocation. I remembered standing before my father, Richard, in his mahogany-paneled study, the words, "I can't do this anymore," tasting like ash in my mouth. His reaction wasn't the explosion I'd braced myself for. Worse, it was a silence, cold and heavy as a granite tombstone. A silence that stretched for weeks, punctuated only by the grave pronouncements that I'd squandered a golden opportunity, that I'd spat on the sacrifices they'd made. His study, which usually smelled of old leather-bound books and the faint metallic tang of success, had felt like a courtroom where my sentence was lifelong underachievement. My mother, Susan, had reacted with a torrent of tears. I'd hear her on the phone with her sisters, her voice a stage whisper that carried through the too thin walls of our house, lamenting how I was lost, how I was simply drifting. Her signature phrase, always delivered with a dramatic, trembling hand clutched to her chest, was, "Oh, Michael, we worry so much about your future." It was invariably followed by a sigh that seemed to suck all the oxygen from a room, a sigh that implied my future was a bleak, barren landscape of their own imagining. She never asked what I wanted my future to be, only mourned the one they designed for me while I drifted. Jason, meanwhile, was on a meteoric rise. A business degree from a top-tier university, a fast track to a high-paying finance job downtown, a sleek new condo with a view that screamed, "I've made it." Family dinners, when I could stomach them, became showcases for Jason's latest triumph. I remember one Christmas vividly. The scent of pine needles and roasting turkey filled the air, a normally comforting aroma that now felt oppressive. Jason unwrapped a ridiculously expensive watch from Dad, who clapped him on the back with a booming voice. "That's my boy, making his mark, conquering the world." Earlier, I'd attempted to explain a nascent idea I had for a community tech project, something to help people navigate local resources. I'd received a polite, dismissive nod from Dad and a, "Well, Michael, it's good to keep busy, son." The implication hung heavy in the air, busy with hobbies, not a real career. Jason, meanwhile, offered condescending advice disguised as brotherly concern about getting serious and finding my place. With his own feet so firmly planted on the fast track, he couldn't fathom any other path. Those first few years after medical school were a blur of cheap apartments that smelled of instant ramen and stale loneliness, part-time jobs that paid the bills but chipped away at my soul. The question gnawed at my sleepless nights. Were they right? Was I a failure? The weight of their disappointment felt like a physical burden, a cloak I couldn't shed. The idea for Access Pause didn't arrive in a flash of divine inspiration. It was a slow burn, ignited by a volunteer experience at a local disability resource center. I saw firsthand the daily, crushing frustrations of people tangled in bureaucracy, fighting for basic healthcare information, for access to specialists, for a shred of dignity. I started small, a side project fueled by black coffee and a stubborn refusal to believe things couldn't be better. I taught myself to code properly, building a simple, shareable database of local, accessible healthcare providers. The work was absorbing, done in the quiet solitude of my tiny apartment, the glow of my monitor my sole companion for countless late nights. The hum of the aging desktop computer was a constant, comforting presence. And then came the first email. Your little program helped me find a doctor who actually understands my condition. Thank you. A spark, a warmth that spread through my chest, a sense of purpose so potent it momentarily eclipsed the years of familial disapproval. It was at a local tech meetup, amidst the drone of a presenter and the smell of lukewarm pizza, that I met David Chun. He was brilliant, a coder leagues above my level, but more importantly, he saw the potential in access when my own family couldn't or wouldn't. He saw the mission. We became co-founders, partners. Our first shared office space was a glorified closet above a noisy print shop, small, messy, and perpetually smelling of industrial ink and David's ubiquitous, overly strong coffee. But it thrummed with an energy, a sense of creation that was intoxicating. It was our sanctuary. Access grew, quietly and steadily. 10,000 users, 50,000, our first small grant. We incorporated, landed our first nonprofit clients, expanded state by state. Each milestone was a private victory, a silent rebuttal to the narrative my family had crafted for me. I tried, several times, to share these successes. I remember excitedly telling Mom about a successful pilot program we'd launched in a neighboring state, how it was projected to help thousands. She'd listened with that familiar, distracted air, her eyes unfocused. "That's nice, dear," she'd said, her attention already shifting. "Did you hear Jason just got a huge promotion? He's thinking of buying a boat. He's taking us all out for a fancy dinner to celebrate." The deflation was instant, a cold, familiar fist clenching in my gut. It always came back to Jason. And now, Jason's engagement dinner. The family group chat had exploded with exclamation points and heart emojis when he posted the picture of Sarah, her hand artfully displayed, the diamond glinting ostentatiously. I typed a curt congratulations and muted the notifications, feeling the joyful flurry a million miles from my reality. The dread for this dinner was palpable, a knot in my stomach that had been tightening for weeks. I knew the script. I would be the living embodiment of the before in Jason's after. Dad would deliver his subtle and not-so-subtle digs, his State of the Union address on my perceived lack of progress. Mom would flutter with anxious glances, her sighs punctuating his pronouncements. Jason, God bless him, would offer that uniquely condescending brand of pity only a successful younger brother can muster. But as I stood before my closet that evening, a small, rebellious spark ignited within me, a weariness of their narrative. I glanced at the Access pause stats on my phone before switching it off. 80,000 active users, real people whose lives were a little easier because of something I had built. A small, almost imperceptible smile touched my lips, a flicker of pride I rarely allowed myself. Instead of the drab, safe suit Mom always subtly pressured me to wear, the one that made me feel like a funeral director in my own wake, I reached for the newer, charcoal gray one-eyed bought with a small bonus after closing a particularly challenging but rewarding contract. It fit well. It made me feel capable. It was a small thing, an almost unconscious act of defiance, but it felt like a gasp of fresh air before stepping into the gilded cage. Lately, the name itself exuded the kind of ostentation my parents adored. As I handed my keys to the valet, the aroma of expensive perfume and even more expensive food wafted from the ornate entrance. Inside, the restaurant was a hushed symphony of clinking crystal, murmured conversations, and the subtle scrape of silver against china. It was the kind of place where you felt your bank balance being silently assessed by the maitre d'. My collar, which had felt perfectly comfortable minutes earlier, suddenly seemed to tighten around my throat. I spotted them almost immediately, ensconced at a prime round table in the center of the room, a tableau of familial bliss for public consumption. My father, Richard, was holding court, his voice a low rumble as he regaled Sarah's parents with what was probably an anecdote, showcasing his own business acumen. My mother, Susan, flitted around Sarah like a nervous hummingbird, adjusting an imaginary stray hair on Sarah's perfectly coiffed head. And Jason, my baby brother, looked every bit the young master of the universe, impeccably dressed in a suit that probably cost more than my first car, a confident, almost predatory smile playing on his lips, his signature expression of smug superiority. "Michael, glad you could make it," Dad said, his handshake perfunctory, his eyes already scanning the room for someone more important. The unspoken addendum, "Don't embarrass us," hung in the air between us. Mom enveloped me in a hug, too tight, too brief, smelling faintly of her signature scent, L'air du Temps, a fragrance I now irrevocably associated with anxiety-ridden family events. "Oh, Michael, you look presentable," she chirped, her eyes sweeping over my suit with an expression I couldn't quite decipher. Surprise? Relief that I wasn't wearing a stained t-shirt? "Sarah, dear, this is our Michael." Sarah Miller turned, extending a hand. Her smile was genuine, her handshake firm, her hazel eyes warm and direct. "So nice to finally meet you, Michael," she said. And, for a fleeting instant, I felt a flicker of something other than dread. She seemed normal, grounded, a stark contrast to the often forced formality and underlying tension that usually characterize Carter family gatherings. I managed a small, awkward smile in return. "Likewise, Sarah. Congratulations to you both." The conversation, or rather, the monologue, swiftly steered by my parents, revolved around Jason. His latest financial conquest at the firm, his upcoming promotion to VP at such a young age, the fantastic and, frankly, a little dull, old money family Sarah hailed from. Each pronouncement felt like another stone carefully placed in the wall, separating me from their glittering world, another layer of varnish on Jason's gilded image. When Sarah's father, a jovial man named Arthur, politely inquired about what I did, Dad interrupted before I could utter a syllable. "Michael's our free spirit," he boomed, a chuckle accompanying the words that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Still chasing butterflies, son?" He winked at Arthur as if sharing an inside joke, the kind that makes you the butt of it. I felt the familiar heat rise in my neck. "I run a tech company," I mumbled, the words feeling inadequate, flimsy, against their grandiose pronouncements about Jason. Mom, ever the adept conversational navigator away from uncomfortable topics, Amy, chimed in quickly, "Oh, but Jason's new position, Arthur. It involves managing a portfolio worth tens of millions. He tries to explain it to us, but it's all so terribly complex and important. Isn't that right, darling?" She beamed at Jason, then flicked a look at me that clearly communicated, "See, Michael, this is what real success sounds like." Jason, never one to miss an opportunity to subtly assert his dominance, leaned back in his chair. "Yeah, the market's been volatile, a real beast. But we're navigating it pretty well. Big responsibilities, you know." He glanced at me, a flicker of that familiar condescension in his eyes. "I guess not everyone's cut out for that kind of pressure." Pressure? I almost snorted. I thought of the frantic, sleepless nights with David, when our main server had crashed just as we were launching a critical update for a state healthcare partner, the livelihoods of thousands of our users hanging in the balance. I thought of the crushing weight of payroll when we were just starting out, the constant, corrosive fear of letting down our small team. But I said nothing. I focused on the intricate pattern of the bread plate before me, the taste of the expensive, artfully arranged food turning to ash in my mouth. The silence from my end of the table was a chasm. My contributions to the family narrative, apparently, were best left unspoken. Despite my family's overwhelming conversational dominance, Sarah seemed genuinely curious. She managed to direct a few more questions my way during a lull, when Dad was pontificating to her mother about his golf handicap. "A tech company, Michael? What kind of platform is it?" "It's a platform that helps people with disabilities access healthcare services and resources more easily," I explained, keeping my voice low. Before Sarah could respond, Dad, whose attention had momentarily drifted towards our side of the conversation, interjected with his signature dismissive hand wave. Very niche, of course. A wonderful personal project for Michael. Keeps him busy. We're still hoping he'll find something a little more substantial, something with a clear career trajectory, you know. I saw Sarah frown, just for a second, at Dad's interruption. She looked at me thoughtfully, a flicker of puzzlement in her intelligent eyes. She opened her mouth as if to ask another question, but Mom, sensing an opportunity, launched into a lively, overly loud anecdote about Jason's adorable childhood fear of clowns, effectively derailing any further inquiry into my personal project. A painful memory surfaced, uninvited. Dad on the phone a few months back, his voice carrying from his study. He'd been talking to his old friend and golfing buddy, Mr. Henderson. I hadn't meant to eavesdrop, but snippets had filtered through. No, Michael's still fiddling around with that little website of his. Lovely idea, of course, bless his heart. But it's not exactly setting the world on fire, you know? Not like Jason. Now he's going places. My father hadn't just been dismissive to my face. He'd been actively curating the narrative of my failure to his peers, solidifying my status as the family's resident underachiever. The memory left a bitter, metallic taste in my mouth, like an old penny. The toast began. Sarah's father delivered a warm, heartfelt speech, welcoming Jason into their family. Then it was Dad's turn. He stood, glass aloft, his voice resonating with practiced paternal pride as he extolled Jason's virtues. A son who has never given us a moment's worry, he declared, his gaze sweeping across the table. He's exceeded every lofty expectation we ever dare to dream for him. A true success story. A beacon of what hard work and dedication can achieve. Then, the inevitable, expertly executed pivot. He glanced at me, his expression softening into one of performative, almost mournful, pity. Of course, he continued, his voice adopting a more somber tone, life isn't a straight path for everyone. Some take detours. Some march to the beat of a different drum, however faint. We continue to support Michael, naturally, to find his way, to discover his own version of contribution. The words, though cloaked in feigned understanding, were branding. Michael, the detour. Michael, the faint drumbeat. Michael, still lost. I stare at the pristine white tablecloth, the expensive linen suddenly feeling like sandpaper beneath my fingers. I could hear Mom's soft, perfectly timed sniffle beside me, her supporting act in this family drama. The air thickened with unspoken judgments, with the weight of their collective disappointment. I could feel Sarah's eyes on me, a silent, questioning look in them. And in that moment, a wave of utter resignation washed over me. A voice whispered in the deepest recesses of my mind. So this is it again. Maybe they're right. Maybe I'll never escape this shadow. The silence that followed my father's toast was heavy, broken only by the polite, almost nervous, clinking of glasses as people took perfunctory sips. I kept my gaze fixed on the intricate weave of the tablecloth, bracing myself for the rest of the evening, which I knew would unfold along the same predictable, painful lines. This was my role, my preordained script in the Carter family saga, the quiet, unremarkable son, a living testament to unfulfilled potential. My parents basked in the afterglow of Dad's speech, a portrait of parental pride. Jason, ever the gracious recipient of praise, nodded with a practiced humility that didn't quite reach his eyes. That's when Sarah turned to me, brow furrowed and thoughtful. She spoke quietly, but in the momentary lull, her voice seemed to cut through the ambient restaurant noise with startling clarity. Access pause. She began, her hazel eyes locking onto mine. You said it helps people with disabilities navigate the healthcare system? I nodded, surprised she remembered, or even cared, amidst the deluge of Jason-centric conversation. Yes, that's the basis. We try to streamline access to specialists, consolidate resources, connect people with support networks, make a complicated process a little less overwhelming. Her eyes, already wide with interest, seemed to ignite from within. And your name is Michael Carter? She pressed, leaning in slightly, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper that nonetheless seemed to make the air around our table crackle with sudden attention. Wait a minute. Her breath hitched. Are you the Michael Carter? The CEO of Access POS. The sound of a fork hitting a china plate at a nearby table was abnormally loud in the sudden, profound silence that descended upon our group. I looked up, startled by the intensity in her voice. My father, who had been midway through taking a self-important sip of his wine, froze, the glass halfway to his lips, his eyes wide and unmoving. My mother's perfectly painted smile had vanished, replaced by open-mouthed confusion, her hand instinctively flying to the pearls at her throat. Jason, who had been smirking at some private joke, stared at me, his face devoid of all expression save for absolute, stunned shock. Even Sarah's parents, who had been politely listening to my father, now looked towards our end of the table with a new, sharp intrigue, sensing the sudden, inexplicable shift in the atmosphere. Before I could confirm or deny, before I could even process the implications of her question, Sarah's face lit up with an almost incandescent excitement. She seemed completely oblivious to the emotional bomb she'd just detonated within the Carter family. Or perhaps she was just beginning to register its shockwaves. "Oh my God, it's you," she exclaimed, her voice gaining volume and vibrancy with each word. "Access POS is incredible. My brother, Mark, was paralyzed in a car accident 3 years ago. Your platform has been an absolute lifesaver for him. The doctors at his rehab hospital recommend it to all their long-term care patients." She turned to the rest of the table, her voice ringing with a genuine, unrestrained passion that was both surprising and captivating. "You have no idea the difference it makes. Try to find specialists who understood his specific needs, coordinating care between multiple doctors, navigating the insurance nightmares. It was a constant, exhausting battle for our whole family. Access streamlined so much of it. Mark even connected with an adaptive sports program through one of your resource links. He says it gave him his life back, a sense of community he thought he'd lost forever." She spoke excitedly about specific features. The curated database of accessible clinics that Dad had dismissed as niche, the secure peer-to-peer support forums where Mark had found solace and practical advice, the integrated telehealth options that spared him grueling trips to outpatient facilities. She even mentioned reading an article a few months back about the visionary, albeit low-profile, CEO behind this transformative platform, never dreaming for a moment it was her future brother-in-law, the family's resident free spirit. "We've been trying to get our hospital foundation to officially partner with Access POS for months," she declared, looking at me with something akin to awe. "The impact you're having is phenomenal." A wave of heat flushed through me, followed by a strange, disorienting lightness, as if the ground had tilted beneath my feet. It was like watching a scene from someone else's life, a life where I wasn't the perpetual disappointment. I saw my father's face, usually so ruddy and confident, blanch, leaving it a mottled, pasty gray. My mother's lips moved silently, her eyes wide and brimming with tears, darting between Sarah and me. Jason just stared, his mouth slightly agape, his earlier smugness completely wiped away, replaced by a bewildered, almost resentful disbelief. The silence from my family was deafening, a palpable void where their usual pronouncements and judgments should have been. Then, in her spontaneous, heartfelt enthusiasm, Sarah unknowingly delivered the coup de grace, the first major plot twist in the carefully constructed narrative of my inadequacy. "It's funny, actually," she mused, a slight frown creasing her brow as she recalled something. "Mark even mentioned overhearing some rather wealthy, influential people, she thought he'd said, talking rather dismissively about the founder of Access POS at some charity gala he attended with his rehab group last year. Someone named Henderson, I think he said. Apparently, they were praising their son to the skies, some finance whiz kid. And when someone asked about their other son, they kind of chuckled and said he was working on some little website for disabled people. Very admirable in its own way, of course, but such a shame he didn't pursue a real career path like his brother." She paused, her gaze traveling from my ashen-faced father to my visibly trembling mother as a dawning. Uncomfortable realization spread across her own features, the dots finally connecting. They said the family name was Carter. "Oh dear," she stammered, her hand flying to her mouth. "I didn't realize. I'm so incredibly sorry. Henderson." The name hit me with the force of a physical blow. Arthur Henderson, Dad's golfing buddy, his occasional confidant. The overheard phone call from months ago, the snippets of conversation I'd dismissed as typical paternal griping, now snapped into place with horrifying clarity. This wasn't just passive ignorance on my parents' part, not just an inability to see or understand. This was active, public dismissal. They had a narrative: Jason, the successful one; Michael, the well-meaning but ultimately misguided hobbyist. And they'd been broadcasting it to their peers, to anyone who would listen, likely to shield themselves from the perceived shame of having a son who didn't fit their narrow definition of achievement. The little website, that, more than anything, stung with a fresh, unexpected venom. Richard Carter, my usually loquacious father, looked as if he'd been slapped. His face flushed to dark, mottled crimson, then drained again to a sickly pallor. Susan let out a small, choked gasp, a genuine sound of distress this time, not one of her usual theatrical sighs. We never understood the magnitude of this, Michael," she whispered, her voice trembling. "We just thought it was something small." Her voice trailed off, lost in the wreckage of her own carefully crafted illusions. The silence at the table was thick, suffocating. Sarah's parents looked utterly bewildered, glancing between their daughter, me, and my stunned parents, clearly struggling to comprehend the undercurrents of this familial implosion. All eyes finally turned to me. I felt a surge of adrenaline, a roaring in my ears, but beneath it, a deep, unexpected calm began to settle. The years of carefully repressed resentment, of feeling unseen, of fighting against the crushing weight of their disapproval, began to recede like an ebbing tide. I looked directly at my father, then at my mother, then at Jason. My voice, when I finally spoke, was quiet, measured, devoid of triumph or accusation, filled only with a weary, undeniable truth. Access POS currently has over 80,000 active users across 15 states. I said, my gaze steady. We're partnered with 3 state healthcare agencies and have a significant waiting list of national nonprofits looking to integrate our services. Last quarter, we closed our series of funding round with a lead investment from one of the top healthcare venture capital firms in the country. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. I simply stated the facts that had always been true, whether my family had chosen to acknowledge them or not. The power dynamic in that opulent, suffocating room had shifted fundamentally and irrevocably. For the first time in my adult life, my father couldn't speak. He simply stared at me, his mouth working silently, a man suddenly confronted with a reality he'd long refused to see. The rest of the engagement dinner passed in a haze of excruciating awkwardness. It was as if a bomb had gone off, and we were all sifting through the emotional debris. Sarah's parents, to their credit, attempted to salvage the evening with polite, albeit strained, conversation, now directing most of their Access POS-related questions towards me with a newfound, almost fervent, respect. I answered them calmly, objectively, providing details about our mission, our technology, our growth, careful to keep any hint of gloating from my voice. There was no need. The truth was potent enough on its own. My father remained unusually silent for the rest of the meal, his face a shifting landscape of shock, shame, and perhaps, just perhaps, a nascent, uncomfortable flicker of respect. He fiddled with his water glass, cleared his throat repeatedly, but offered no further pronouncements. My mother, on the other hand, seemed to shrink in on herself. She made a few aborted attempts to explain their previous ignorance, her words dissolving into halting, tearful phrases like, "We just always wanted the best for you, Michael. We just didn't realize it was so significant." Her signature sighs were still there, but they'd lost their theatrical power. They now sounded more like the slow deflation of a puncture balloon. Jason was a study in sullen resentment. He picked at his exquisitely prepared, undoubtedly expensive food with his jaw clenched, avoiding my gaze entirely. The golden boy's smile had vanished, replaced by a resentful confusion that seemed to sour his features. He looked like a suddenly dethroned king, bewildered by the abrupt shift in the kingdom's allegiance. I excused myself as soon as it was politely possible. The rich food, which I barely touched, tasted like cotton in my mouth. The goodbyes were stiff, hurried, a collective desire to escape the suffocating atmosphere that hung over us all. Stepping out of the restaurant into the cool night air felt like surfacing for air after being submerged for too long. In the days that followed, my phone buzzed with unusual frequency. My mother called several times, her voice thick with unshed tears and a new, almost cloying sweetness. "Michael, darling, we need to talk. Your father and I are so incredibly proud of you. It's just that, well, we didn't always show it properly, did we?" Her familiar sighs now sounded hollow, stripped of their manipulative edge. My father, a man who typically communicated in pronouncements or dismissive grunts, actually left a voicemail. His tone was gruff, as always, but tinged with an unusual note of hesitation, almost humility. "Michael, it's your father. Your mother and I would like to understand more about this. Access Pause, your company. Call me when you have a moment." I let the calls go to voicemail. I listened to their messages with a strange detachment. The validation I'd craved from them for so long, the approval I'd once believed essential to my self-worth, had finally arrived, gift-wrapped in their shocking realization. But now that it was here, it felt anticlimactic, less significant somehow than the quiet, steady validation I'd already found in my work, in the gratitude of Access Pause's users, in Sarah's unexpected, objective affirmation. I needed space, time to process, not just their reaction, but my own. I did speak with Sarah. She called, her voice laced with genuine mortification, profusely apologizing if she'd caused any family strife. I reassured her, my gratitude sincere. "You didn't do anything wrong, Sarah," I told her. "You just spoke the truth, something they hadn't been willing to hear from me." A bond of mutual respect, an unexpected alliance, formed between us during that call. She mentioned, almost as an aside, that Jason had been incredibly defensive and, frankly, impossible to deal with since the dinner, snapping at her over trivial matters. That comment about Jason lingered. I knew I needed to talk to him. Not for an apology, I wasn't sure he was capable of one, but for my own understanding to close that particular painful chapter. I met him for coffee a few days later at a neutral, impersonal downtown cafe. He immediately went on the defensive, his old smugness attempting a weak resurgence. "Look, I get it, okay? You're a big shot now, Mr. Tech Genius. No need to rub in my face." The words were bitter, laced with an envy he didn't bother to conceal. I kept my voice even calm. "This isn't about rubbing it in your face, Jason. This isn't a competition. I just want to understand something. Did you have any idea about Access Pause, about its growth, its impact?" He scoffed, stirring his latte with unnecessary vigor. "How would I know? You were always so secretive with your little projects, always off in your own world." "I wasn't secretive, Jason," I said, my patience wearing thin. "I tried to tell you. I tried to tell all of you, numerous times. You just weren't listening." I reminded him specifically about the TechCrunch article I'd emailed him the year before, the one detailing our seed funding round, the one where I'd genuinely asked for his financial insights on how to scale. His response at the time, a memory that still stung, had been a dismissive one-line put down. "Tilda, bro, sounds like nerd stuff. Stick to what you know, and let me handle the real money." His facade finally cracked. He stared into his coffee cup, as if searching for answers in the swirling foam. "Okay, fine," he mumbled, his voice barely a whisper. "I saw the article. I even Googled Access Pause after that. I knew it was getting big, bigger than I thought." I waited, letting the silence stretch. "I didn't tell Mom and Dad the whole truth," he finally admitted, the words tumbling out, his face flushed with a deep, unbecoming shame. You were always the artistic one, the sensitive one, the one who needed protecting. I was the smart one, the responsible one, the one who was going to make them proud financially. If you suddenly became this tech millionaire or whatever, where would that leave me? What will my role be then? It was easier to let them keep thinking you were struggling a bit. Kept things simpler. A wave of profound sadness washed over me, eclipsing any anger I might have felt. My own brother. This was the second, and perhaps more painful, twist. His deliberate, calculated decision to keep my success a secret, to maintain his golden child status, to protect his own fragile ego. This, I realized, was my true rock bottom in terms of my old family dynamic. The final, crushing understanding of how deeply flawed, how conditional their love and support had always been. The last vestiges of my childhood illusions about familial loyalty crumbled to dust. I felt a hollow ache in my chest, an emptiness where those illusions used to reside. Armed with this painful clarity, I had one last, difficult conversation with my parents. Together. I didn't yell. I didn't accuse. I simply, calmly, laid out how their words, their actions, their relentless comparisons and dismissals had made me feel for the past decade. Their definition of success was so narrow. I told them, my voice steady despite the tremor I felt deep inside, and because I didn't fit it, they made me feel inadequate like a constant disappointment. I didn't need them to understand Access Paza's balance sheet now, or be impressed with the venture capital. I needed them to see me, then, to value my efforts regardless of the outcome. I told them I needed space, significant space, to redefine our relationship on new terms. My terms. There were more tears from my mother, a stunned, uncomfortable silence from my father. But as I walked away from that conversation, I felt a profound sense of liberation, as if a heavy weight I hadn't even realized I was carrying had finally been lifted from my shoulders. I no longer needed their approval to feel worthy. I threw myself back into Access Paz with renewed vigor, a clearer sense of purpose. The company thrived. My relationships with David and my dedicated team, my chosen family, deepened. My interactions with my parents became infrequent, polite, and carefully managed by me, dictated by my own comfort level. The old, toxic power dynamic was broken, shattered on the floor of that pretentious restaurant. Months later, I attended Jason and Sarah's wedding. I was polite to my parents, exchanged a civil, if distant, greeting with Jason, but had a genuinely warm, engaging conversation with Sarah, who greeted me with an open smile and sincere affection. As I watched my parents observing me from across the reception hall, I saw a complex mix of emotions in their eyes: regret, confusion, and perhaps, for the first time, a nascent, if distant, respect. I felt a sense of peace. I was no longer the family outcast, the perpetual failure. I was simply Michael, a man comfortable in his own skin, defined by his own accomplishments, walking his own path. The final scene of this chapter of my life doesn't unfold at a tense family dinner or in a sterile boardroom. It's me, standing on a stage at a major health tech conference, the warm spotlight on my face. I'm delivering a keynote address about Access Paza's mission, about the power of technology to bridge gaps and empower individuals. As I look out at the sea of faces in the auditorium, doctors, patients, advocates, innovators, I feel a profound sense of fulfillment, a quiet joy that resonates deep in my bones. This is my validation. This is my success, defined on my own terms. For years, I'd allowed my family to write my story, assigning me the role of the son who faltered, the one who didn't measure up. It took the voice of a stranger, an unexpected catalyst, to help me begin to reclaim my own narrative. But the real journey, I've come to understand, wasn't about making them see me. It was about me finally seeing myself, recognizing my own worth independent of their applause or their criticism. It was about understanding that true fulfillment doesn't come from fitting into a pre-drawn box, but from building something meaningful, from touching lives, from pursuing a purpose that ignites your own soul. What chapter of your own story are you ready to rewrite?